Thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Here's what we're looking at.
My life has been genuinely enriched by helping people from our great state and nation.
Lawmakers in Springfield hailed the historic career of retiring Senator Dick Durbin. That and the latest on budget negotiations in a live report from the state capitol. The battle over redistricting heats up. What to know about the shape of things less than 6 months out from the midterm elections.
In this play, we're interrogating what we believe.
And Oscar-winning playwright Terrell Alvin McRaney on his latest production commissioned for Steppenwolf Theater's 50th anniversary. First off tonight, Chicago's U.S. Attorney Andrew Boutros is announcing changes to his office's grand jury procedures on the heels of bombshell misconduct allegations. Boutros says the new internal reforms will improve transparency and effectiveness while, quote, greatly reducing the likelihood of mistakes and errors. The move comes just days after Boutros personally dismissed all charges against the Broadview Six and apologized in open court for his prosecutor's conduct in securing charges. The judge in that case found the assistant U.S. attorneys held improper communications with grand jurors outside of court proceedings and excused some jurors who disagreed with the government's theory of the case. Boutros says his office has launched a review of other grand jury presentations that could have been impacted in a similar fashion. New research shows that in the 6 months after ShotSpotter was disconnected, Chicago police responded to the most serious 911 calls 4 minutes faster than they did when the gunshot detection system was still in place. The U Chicago Justice Project studied the response times of police officers in the 12 South and West Side neighborhoods where ShotSpotter was installed. Researchers say there is no evidence that the decision to turn off the microphones slowed police response times or drove up violent crime, as many warned. The analysis also shows that homicides dropped more than 32% during the 9 months after ShotSpotter was decommissioned, and violent crime more than 11% in those same neighborhoods. Though tickets to the Obama Presidential Center's opening weekend are already sold out, visitors will still have access to a free 3-day grand opening festival June 19th through the 21st. The center is promising music and dancing on the plaza, double Dutch performances in the home court athletic center, plus playstations with mascots from Chicago's pro sports teams. There will also be drop-in gardening activities as well as guided and self-guided tours of the campus. The center is asking folks, though, to register in advance online so they can get an approximate head count. You can learn more about how to do that on our website. The Chicago Police Department is touting improvements to police community relations and say that while there is work to do, progress is real. That's one of the messages coming out of our WTTW Town Hall meeting in Pilsen at the historic Talia Hall. Last night, an audience of community members from around the city heard from and interacted with panelists, including community leaders and activists, an academic, and the director of the Chicago Police Department's community policing effort, Glenn Brooks. The conversation was civil but passionate. Most of the discussion centered on how residents and law enforcement can work together to create a safer city. Brooks said efforts to bring community policing to the forefront are improving.
We are now present throughout the department. We're in the room. We are part of the decision making, whether it's policy, whether it's training, whether it is implementing our deployments. All these things are now a part of community policing where they weren't. So it has definitely improved. We have a long ways to go. So let me not say just because we're improving that we're there. We are nowhere near the finish line. The ultimate goal here is to have the police and the community continually to work on their safety and determining what that safety looks like.
And you can read more about last night's event and see all special coverage of police and policing in Chicago on our website. Up next, a look at where state budget negotiations stand. Nick Blumberg joins us live from Springfield right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Illinois lawmakers gave retiring Senator Dick Durbin a hero's welcome at a joint session in Springfield this afternoon. Durbin said his career in public life has been an honor, ticking off some of his proudest accomplishments while warning of the divisions facing the country. Nick Blumberg has more on Durbin's address and other developments in Springfield as lawmakers head toward adjournment. Nick.
Well, Brandis, Senator Durbin is set to leave office in January after 30 years in the U.S. Senate. And as we heard at the top of the show, he says that work has genuinely enriched his life. Now, during his long career in Congress, he's worked on a wide array of issues, including one he touched on in his address today that sounds almost like it's from another lifetime: banning smoking on airplanes. He's also been a longtime advocate for immigration reform, championing the DREAM Act as a pathway to citizenship for young people brought to the United States without documents as children. After years of pushing for that bill with no success, Durbin recalled that one day he picked up the phone and rang up an old friend of his from the U.S. Senate by the name of
which was a good one. He was president of the United States. And I said, can you do anything by executive order to help the Dreamers? And that's when he came up with DACA. DACA, at its best, was helping 900,000 young people in America, giving them the legal right to work without fear of deportation.
Durbin also warned about the danger of political divisions facing the U.S., arguing that the long tradition of the peaceful transfer of power has been under threat in recent years, and that election integrity could be under attack in the upcoming midterms.
Debates in Congress and contests in our courts indicate this next election may be challenged in ways we have never seen before in our history. Abraham Lincoln, in a House divided speech that he gave here in Springfield, gave a grim warning that the divisions in America over the issue of slavery could destroy our nation. We see similar divisions today.
Nick, in addition to celebrating Durbin's career, of course, lawmakers have a long list of items to accomplish before they're set to adjourn on Sunday. What do we know about where the budget stands?
Well, as is often the case, folks here expect it might go right down to the wire. We heard earlier this month from Governor Pritzker's budget office that they're expecting $173 million less in revenue in the coming fiscal year than originally predicted. So that means lawmakers already facing a tight budget really don't have a lot of wiggle room. Now, the budget that the governor proposed in February floated an array of new sources of cash, including a proposed fee on large social media firms and changes to gambling taxes. But we heard earlier today from a group of Republican budgeteers in the Senate. They said that new taxes are going to hurt Illinois residents and warned that a last-minute budget just doesn't give legislators enough time to parse the spending plan.
Instead of making Illinois more competitive, these ideas move us in the opposite direction. Our Illinois families are already stretched thin, and they do not want higher taxes.
And of course, there's been a lot of attention this session on the possibility of so-called mega projects bill aimed at keeping the bears in Illinois. Where does that stand?
That's right. That measure cleared the House last month, and it's now in the hands of the state Senate. And there's the possibility that there could be some pretty significant changes. The original proposal would allow for large-scale developments like an Arlington Heights Stadium to lock in property tax rates for 40 years. Crain's Chicago Business reporting today that some lawmakers are considering narrowing the scope of the bill in order to garner the necessary votes. We also heard one of the lead negotiators on that mega project bill, Representative Cam Buckner of Chicago. He was pushing back on a report from the Cook County Treasurer's Office that found this mega project measure would give the Bears an estimated $39 million in annual property tax savings, but that the benefit to taxpayers would be potentially iffy. Now, responding to that report, Buckner said, quote, "You can't count full tax revenue from a project that doesn't exist, may never get financed, may get tied up in court, or may go to another state. The real choice is not full taxes versus reduced taxes. The real choice is a negotiated payment on a real project or full taxes on an empty lot." Obviously going to be a lot of interest into whether they can get that bill into the end zone. Brandis.
Of course, the clock is ticking. Nick, thanks so much. And you can catch more of Nick's coverage of the legislative session in Springfield by visiting our website. That's WTTW.com/news. The redistricting battle that began in Texas last year continues to have ripple effects across the nation. Just this week, a redistricting effort in South Carolina stalled out while a map in Alabama faces a legal challenge. But lawmakers in Florida and Tennessee have successfully adopted new congressional maps. Some of these efforts have been made easier, though, since the U.S. Supreme Court ruling in Louisiana versus Calais that weakened key provisions of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Joining us with more on this now are Connor Kozichek, Program Counsel at the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and the Midwest Voting Rights Project, and John Mark Hansen, a professor of political science at the University of Chicago. Thanks to you both for joining us. Mark, starting with you first, even before the recent Supreme Court decision, there were states that were looking at mid-decade redistricting, and we kind of mentioned it at the top, starting in Texas. But remind us, if you would, of how this all got started.
It got started really in Texas. President Trump really sort of pressed them to redistrict in the middle of the decade. He was thinking about how he could sort of salt in some additional members from the Republican Party, and thinking that since he had done better than he had before in Texas, and particularly with Latino voters, that there might be an opportunity to pick up more Republican seats in Texas.
Connor, explain for us, if you would, the Supreme Court's finding in Louisiana versus Calais.
Yeah, this was a decision that eviscerated Section 2 of the Federal Voting Rights Act, which is often referred to as the crown jewel of the civil rights movement. The federal VRA protects against vote dilution, which is unfair districts that prevent communities of color from electing the candidates of their choice. And in Louisiana versus Calais, the U.S. Supreme Court said that state or local governments creating maps essentially can assert that they did not intentionally racially discriminate in making those maps, and instead can use partisan goals, even if there's a racially discriminatory consequence in creating those maps.
And this decision by the Supreme Court, it's also, it comes after a couple of other Supreme Court decisions regarding the Voting Rights Act that altogether, what would you say the status or is it a shell of itself after all of these decisions by the Supreme Court?
Yeah, it's a big bill that includes many pieces, but over the course of the last decade in particular, it has been chipped away at and fully gutted depending on the provision.
How does the shape of a district, how does that affect the voting power that voters have?
It's really significant. There's a number of factors that go into the map itself, but the communities that are included within a district determines who is voting on specific elected representatives and shape the outcomes of those elections.
Mark, are there other examples of mid-decade redistricting throughout history that you could name?
There are a few. There were several states in the 1960s who which had to redistrict their congressional delegations because of the Voting Rights Act, actually. Many of them in the South. They tried to evade it, and the courts didn't allow them to do so. Probably the one that sort of touched off a lot of the kind of competitive partisan redistricting was a mid-decade redistricting that was done in Texas in the 2000s. That was instigated by Tom DeLay, who was a U.S. representative from Texas, from the Houston area, and who was the minority whip in the U.S. House at the time. The Republicans did very, very well in 2002 in the midterm elections in the state legislature. And so DeLay saw an opportunity to change a map that had been drawn by Democrats after the 2000 census, and to turn it into a much more effective map for the Republicans, and it was very, very successful. So it's happened from time to time, usually when there are legal things that need to be addressed, but increasingly it's become an extension of partisan warfare.
Connor, earlier this year there was an attempt to draw a new map in Indiana. What happened there?
Yeah, there was intense pressure from the current presidential administration for Indiana to redraw its maps, and we saw significant pushback from voters and nonpartisan organizations that resisted an unfair mapping process. And you also saw a number of Republican elected officials in the Indiana Senate and House, in addition to Democrats, push back forcefully against that, stopping that process from happening this year.
Mark, just yesterday, a proposed map in Alabama was overturned by a district court. Bring us up to speed on what's happening there.
The way I understand it is that this was a case that actually originated in Alabama a couple of years ago in 2023. The state legislature drew new districts as a result of the 2020 census, and drew them in such a way that there would remain only a single majority African American district in the state. A federal appeals court ruled that it diluted African American voting power and was illegal under the Voting Rights Act. That case was actually taken by the United States Supreme Court, which actually upheld the challenge, and it didn't immediately force Alabama to do the redistricting, but it did require Alabama to do a second map. That second map was then also ruled out of bounds by a federal district court, and there was a second African American district created in Alabama. And it's that same panel, that same district court, that ruled recently that, or just a few days ago, that the map is in violation not just of the Voting Rights Act, but the Voting Rights Act as interpreted in the most recent decision in Calais.
And of course, there's a lot of focus on how the decisions and how the redistricting will impact the representation of black voters in particular. And there's a reason for that, right? The civil rights movement was to obtain rights, of course, for African Americans in this country. But what other voters does the Voting Rights Act still protect?
Well, the Voting Rights Act has been extended as well to Latino voters. And so, as African American representation in the U.S. House of Representatives has increased over time and markedly in state legislatures as well. That's the other thing that we ought to be talking about. The same has been true of Latinos, Hispanics as well. And so those protections are also sort of by the boards now that the Supreme Court has ruled in that, ruled that such efforts are out of bounds.
Connor, can Illinois or any other states do anything on their own to uphold some of the provisions of the Voting Rights Act?
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, it has been over a decade of federal court decisions chipping away and gutting the Federal Voting Rights Act. And in response to that, many states have enacted state equivalents that secure or strengthen the protections under the federal VRA. Illinois currently has a bill introduced, sponsored by Senator Graciela Guzman, the Illinois Voting Rights Act of 2026, Senate Bill 3170, that seeks to secure those protections for voters in Illinois against voter suppression, against vote dilution, those unfair districts, and also expanding language access for voters whose first language isn't English.
Mark, we've got just 30 seconds, but could all of this redistricting and redrawing, could it backfire for either party?
Well, I think yes, and probably more likely for the Republicans than the Democrats. The problem with what President Trump went ahead with was that it was it proceeded on the assumption that all of the votes that he won in 2024 in places like Texas would stay Republican, which is a completely crazy idea because the circumstances have changed. He's an incumbent president now, and
people vote on different circumstances, right? And sometimes districts themselves can change. That is where we'll have to leave it. I'm sure something that the two of you and we will be keeping an eye on for the next less than 6 months. Connor Kozisek and John Mark Hansen, thanks to you both for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Up next, exploring grief and the value of life in a production at Steppenwolf Theater. A son lost in a clash with the police, a huge cash settlement on the table, and a father torn between staying put in Chicago or starting anew. That all-too-real dilemma is what underpins the play Windfall, a new work written by Oscar-winning Steppenwolf ensemble member Terrell Alvin McCraney. And it's a work that McCraney says he didn't take on lightly. Nick Blumberg recently brought us this story. Here's another look.
It says that someone who lived here has had a criminal record?
I did stupid, but it wasn't criminal.
Windfall was commissioned as part of Steppenwolf Theater's 50th anniversary season.
And it's the first play written specifically for its ensemble theater, with the audience seated in the round, an immersive experience that befits the play's emotional weight.
Take the money. It's blood money, though. It's all blood money.
Cast member Glenn Davis is also Steppenwolf's co-artistic director, along with Audrey Francis.
Usually actors don't run theater companies. I think here at Steppenwolf, because it's an ensemble theater made up mostly of actors, we also have directors, writers, but we started as an acting company, and that very much still is our identity today.
Among the cast, Davis, Alana Arenas, and John Michael Hill, all of whom appeared in 2024's Purpose, which opened at Steppenwolf and eventually moved to Broadway, winning the 2025 Tony for Best Play.
The secret weapon of Steppenwolf, I often say, is the fact that you have these relationships that have traversed time and space over so many years.
Including Davis's relationship with fellow ensemble member and Windfall playwright Terrell Alvin McCraney.
Not only my best friend, but also one of the great dramatists of his generation.
I often talk about the spiritual aspects of theater, that we come into a room and we believe together, and therefore an act of faith is happening. In this play, we're interrogating what we believe, and we believe as a society more than anything that money cures more things than we'd like to admit.
Glenn Davis told us that this was the play you said you were most afraid to write, most anxious about. Why was that?
Money is the thing that some people say the root of all evil is based on, that wars are started about. And here I was wanting to make a play about the ways in which money are attributed to black bodies, particularly those who are harmed by the city.
The challenging material appealed to longtime New York-based actor Michael Potts, who's making his Steppenwolf debut.
I'd wanted to work here for a very, very long time. I was wondering why I hadn't been asked.
Take the money. That money.
Whatever it is, it ain't enough.
What drew you to this role?
I love puzzles, and I love this kind of puzzle he's created about this character, about these characters, and this story, and how it fits in the human experience.
The play is infused with the joy of community, the joy of tackling something together.
Actor Alana Arenas has known McCraney since high school and an arts community center in Miami. They both went on to study at DePaul, where they met Glenn Davis.
Maybe more than once, our directors looked at us and had to say, do I have to separate you? Because there's a lot of playfulness in the room, but it's cozy, like a old comforting sweater.
As I said, we have not done anything wrong and do not admit to doing anything wrong.
Terrell is very masterful in knowing that we need to have a serious conversation, but choosing a tone that makes it palatable for us to all engage.
Steppenwolf has previously staged several of McCraney's works. He's also well known as the writer of the Oscar-winning film Moonlight, adapted from one of his own plays.
We just saw Ryan Coogler join a club that you're a part of black artists recognized with a screenplay Oscar. What did it feel like to see him up there on that stage?
Oh man, I might cry. Oh. Yeah, it was extraordinary. It was extraordinary, and the way in which he holds his community so close, and that he's a leader in the community, it was astonishing to see.
As Steppenwolf marks its 50th season, the artists working on Windfall are cognizant of the history they're carrying on and helping write.
The initial group of ensemble members who started in the mid-70s, they've played husband and wife, brother and sister, brother and brother, father, son, mother, daughter, all the things over 50 years now. And so to be able to know someone that well is a gift.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg.
And Windfall runs through May 31st. And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Stay connected with our reporters and what they're working on by following us on Instagram at WTTW Chicago. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that serves the needs of clients in the Chicago area and throughout the nation.